Let's do Rubin.
I was about to say.
Right? Come on.
My favorite.
He is very fun to talk about because, Dave Rubin, I don't know where he's been. I know he said that he was in the lab with a pen and a pad trying to come up with a way to get back at Twitter for being banned for 48 hours for COVID misinformation. Was that what it was? So he's just stewing on his evil plan, or his righteous plan, as he would put it.
His righteous plan to offer Joe Rogan a whole bunch of money to come to his dumb social media site.
Right, exactly. Is local still yodeling? Still yodeling?
It's still trying to sign checks that people don't want to accept.
Right. So I don't know how long it takes for him to come up with ideas. My guess is that his brain works at a different pace than other people in his profession. So he is now only just getting to the Holocaust comparisons when it comes to vaccinated people. It's just like, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham, they were doing this 2 or 3 months ago. Dave's brain only caught up recently. Here he is with his take on the Canadian trucker convoy.
I just said to my guys as we were playing this, it's truly incredible watching these people flip the story and how they reverse everything they say about one thing when it's their guys doing it versus how they say it when it's the other guys doing it. First off, I just want to say something very, very clearly here. I lost family members on both sides of the Holocaust, okay? I grew up around Holocaust survivors. I am well versed in what the Holocaust was and what the demonization of people is. Although the guy who was interviewed there, and by the way, great cherry picking on that Daily Show, and then they cherry pick that on the Daily Show. And then, of course, they throw that to CNN because they're all in on it together. I believe they're both owned by Viacom. It's just one big circle jerk in essence.
All right.
Regardless of what the guy said, whether you think he said it in a butchered way or he shouldn't say it or something like that, the way something like the Holocaust starts is you otherize people, right? You keep otherizing them. You say, oh, you can't be part of the economy. You can't own a store. You can't do this. We're going to demonize you. You're diseased. So it is not a giant leap, okay? It really is not, and I don't care how much hate I get for this. It is not a giant leap after 2 years of demonizing certain people who wanted choice, medical choice, and choice used to be thought of as a good thing, to compare them to the Jews before the Holocaust. It's not a perfectly symmetrical situation. Right? There aren't gas chambers in Canada yet. Okay, so it's not perfect, but it is not deeply wrong. And
So that's not the Holocaust doesn't happen just because we say that a group of people are not in the right, which is exactly what's happening here. You are not in the right if you are not getting vaccinated. That's just not the right thing to do. You're not in the right, and you don't get to participate in certain elements of society if you pose a risk to others. How the Holocaust happened is because of right-wing fascism. And that's what right-wingers can't say. That's how it happened. But like MLK, like these other massive historical events that prove that the right is incapable of actually doing something good for society and are historically proven to be bad, they have to obscure that. That's what that's all about.
Absolutely. And I just want to right-wing fascism in Europe, especially in Nazi Germany, that was largely inspired, some of their worst atrocities by, the actions of Americans, the actions of Americans and the way they treat Native Americans, the actions of Americans when the way they treat, the way they treated slaves, the actions of Germany prior to the Holocaust in their colonies in Africa. This is this is one of those things that I think makes it so hard to take it seriously when people pretend like we can have these sort of cross alliances in the media between the left and the right, because, people who are more encouraged to have those alliances due to the monetary incentives that they, promise, pretend these comparisons are less terrible, lazy comparisons about we want people to have freedom. We don't want people to be lose their freedom to access goods just because of this little small thing. It's well, we know how all of these people, we know how Dave Rubin feels about the actual precursors to the Holocaust that still exist in our society. We know how he feels about the prison industrial complex. We know how he feels about the military industrial complex. Holocaust. We know how he mostly feels about domestic spying and all these other things. The idea that like it's so like rather that he wants it to be encouraging and other, you know, right wingers want it to be so encouraging and confusing that they think that, you know, people who they're aligned with are receiving special treatment, should receive special treatment, or are rather not receiving special treatment by the government when it cracks down on protests. But we as the left should expect, you know, should allow for that special treatment. It's not surprising at all to me. It's just, you know, Dave Rubin's a bigot. Dave Rubin thinks that, you know, people aligned with his personal ideology deserve better treatment, special treatment than people who he views as inherently lesser than him, either because he, you know, thinks that having those views makes him money or because he truly believes in his heart is irrelevant to me. But there's just like this wave of media, or rather this wave of hope people want to see in right-wing media, people like Dave Rubin, that is entirely based on the fact that they're just basically bigots, that they think that they deserve special treatment from the government, where my position is that, you know, yeah, protesting should be legal. It's currently not very legal. We should do something about that. Not, you know, not on an individual case-by-case basis, but entirely overhaul the system. Well, Dave Rubin wants you to just focus on that one sliver of the protests he like thinks are right, and then sort of check you like, oh, I thought you liked protests. It's like, yeah, you know, I do. I do like protests. You don't.
The problem is how like these folks obscure the actual, like, I'd call it fascism that exists in our country every day. You look at like what's causing the trucker shortage. It's not like these vaccine mandates. This is from Wells Fargo conference call, and the reason being is very simple. And some of you know this, and this may be new. It is really about drug testing. We've legalized marijuana in some states, but obviously not all, but some. And you have, as a trucker, you have a federal mandate for drug testing, right? Like that sort of thing. You didn't hear the Nazi comparisons by those folks when it comes to the drug war, even though that led America to be the #1 cager of human beings in the entire fucking planet, right? And yeah, like that. It's just like that obscurantism, and like that freedom is to continue commerce during a pandemic is. I mean, let's just say that has a dark history in America. Like, I'm just thinking of the steamship that went up the Missouri River called the Yellowstone that carried smallpox up to the Mandan and Hidatsa Indians and wiped out like 75 to 90% of those folks in like the 1830s. So like, okay, that's a type of commercial freedom that you have to just go infect people. And the idea that like we're calling folks that decide that they want to carry a higher risk of infecting people with the virus as disease, like, no, you are voluntarily taking a choice. This isn't a race-based argument like the ones Hitler was making, which, as Brandon pointed out, were inspired here. Yeah.
Well, no one likes to talk about how Hitler stole from the United States, but that's a separate conversation too. I mean, I feel like another way that right wingers like Dave Rubin and Tucker Carlson could support the everyday trucker and the working man, which they really do try to use the cachet of like the mythology of that profession in order to create a shorthand to make it seem like they're protecting workers. Because again, for right wingers, workers are only if you have a hard hat on, or you're a trucker, or if you are white and male and you have grease smeared on your face. But they are quite silent about the efforts of truckers in, say, California right now to unionize. And who are trying to make clear that their working conditions and their wages are abysmal. And there is actually very little media coverage about that in general. I know Alex Press wrote about it in Jacobin, but I haven't seen much about it. And that's the real outrage, is the fact that that despite the essential nature of trucking in this country in order to maintain our supply chains, which is what the powerful people in our government and in the capitalists really want to maintain, they're willing to pay starvation wages for their truckers and give them very little protections, and contract them out, as opposed to, I don't know, actually paying them.
This conversation that should the left be engaging, it's like, what are they doing? What are they throwing to the left? They're calling Justin Trudeau a communist, right? It's not like they're not even like aiming for any sort of like decommodification, or like their liberty is like And people got mad at like the Washington Post for pointing out like the historic relationship between, say, freedom and slavery. But like their liberty is one that says, fuck you, I'm going to get mine. And like, I'm sorry, I don't see any room for the left of that. And like, maybe if they're like, oh, we got to get Americans Medicare for all, or I don't know what are people so impressed by? Their demand is to take the pandemic less seriously. Like that's not something you can sign on with.
I have a little bit of a different take than you guys. I personally am just happy to finally hear from a liberal supporting those blue collar truckers.
I don't know. I feel like for the the right wing content creator, like the working class is just another like noble savage archetype. It's the newest version of that. It's
That's
just like
such a good point.
It's like this group of, I guess, homogenous group of quote unquote workers who are like, in their minds, like they're mud farmers. They live in like Alabama, like shoveling coal into another coal pile and like face covered in soot. And like, yeah, they don't want anything better than they have. And you shouldn't like try to encourage them. They just want to, they just want to be allowed to keep being like, I guess, racist or something. And that's just like, the petty bigotry of low expectations. It's not as though they are not bigoted against the working class or even against truckers. They just view them in this particular instance as a very useful vehicle to like draw an, aid for themselves to, ventriloquize a lot of their positions, which is that, oh, yeah, we want the government to take the pandemic less seriously, either because we have a personal, ideological position about the government taking anything seriously, or just because we want to feel like everything's going back to normal. And, I generally think that, it's great to do protests. It's great to make the government come out and get you afterwards. But ultimately, that's just what happens in these countries. Like, that's just the way, the government treats protesters. They've treated the convoy protesters way better than protesters are treated in, indigenous protesters are treated in Canada, indigenous protesters are treated in America. It's not about what's good for the goose being good for the gander. It's just that this is not a problem that can be solved by simply believing in like trickle down, like social justice. That like, if we just take care of the people who are last affected by this problem, like the white working class truckers who are, being funded by like various dark money organizations, then it's going to make things worse for people who are already overburdened by this exact system that they're trying to just, shine a spotlight on now.
Not only just the treatment of like, you brought up, indigenous protests in Canada and even here in the US, not even just like the treatment of how, they're quashed, but even whether or not we hear about those protests being quashed. Like these trucker convoys have received such a disproportionate amount of media coverage compared to literally any other protest. Like a leftist protest literally would get little to no coverage unless they went out of their way to literally like demand it and beg for it and go to like a media outlet and specifically say, here we are. And these guys are literally just getting it because of who they appear to represent.
Yeah, and which side of the politics they benefit, with their benefits.
It's also even how we're talking about it. Like here we like obviously we've made the addendums of who actually represents these truckers, but you see all these other outlets though, the truckers, the trucker convoy, the freedom convoy. It's like if you look into the demographics of who these people are, they're mostly not truckers. I mean, would we call any other protest that just declares itself a certain identity to call them by that name?
The trucker riot.
Right.
No, I mean, we do the exact opposite. If Black Lives Matter is protesting because of the, undisclosed number of police shootings that occur in this country, and like one person as part of that protest yells at someone at like a bakery or something, then in the entirety of Black Lives Matter is culpable for that in the mind of like the right wing media, and then the left, some of the center left media has to take, the side that you're right. We can condemn the entire protest based on this one person because, a protest is not is the responsibility of whoever plans it. And it's just an asymmetric expectation of like proof. The left is expected to support every protest as, based on like the Constitution, I guess, of Canada. I don't really know what Canada allows in terms of protesting because I'm not Canadian. But, we're supposed to protect everyone's right to protest and free speech, even if it's largely to the detriment of the very things that, the fundamental system that they're trying to, I guess, say ensures that free speech, because a lot of this is just like a cyclical snake eating its own tail thing, where like, you're asking for the government to be weakened so that it's less able to take care of pandemics. But a lot of these people who are saying that the truckers are being treated so badly are the same ones who want to give the police more money. The same ones who are constantly advocating for like the expansion of the police state, constantly advocating for the expansion of like, authoritarianism in the government, as long as it's being disguised that's only going to affect, Black people. And like he said, honestly, a lot of what Dave Rubin said is not incorrect. It's just his position is that it's something that can be tackled simply by preventing like white people from having to be, suffer the consequences that are already being suffered by everybody else, or rather rich white people in their avatars. But like, that's just a function of capitalism. Eventually it starts eating like the bottom level. Like, it's just not, it's a zero-sum game.
All right, let's read some IMs. The emo drag.
I don't think Dave Rubin's right about the gas chambers coming to Canada. I just want to add that.
Yeah, it's going to be maple
I think that was clear. I think that was clear.
They're gonna drown the truckers in like a big vat of maple syrup, like they did witches back in the Salem days.
At least they'll be tasty. Although I don't know, that amount of maple syrup might be a bit of sensory overload.
They'll come out frozen in carbonite like Han Solo in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah,
you look like the crystallized mosquito from Jurassic Park.
Just thinking about washing my hair after being in a vat of maple syrup.
I didn't know that they used to do that to witches with the maple syrup. That's. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense, but that's
no,
brutal.
He's messing around.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I was substituting water for maple syrup, or vice versa.
Okay. I mean, it'd be a lot easier to float, I think, in maple syrup.
Right.
Yeah, it's dense.